This video is a recording of a panel from Story Crafting Sessions Science Fiction, a free virtual conference hosted by the Weeknight Writers Group in partnership with Renaissance Press. To learn more about the Weeknight Writers Group, go to businessforauthors.com/weeknight-writers. And to learn more about Renaissance Press, you can go to pressesrenaissancepress.ca.
Hello, everybody. My name is Bethany Baptiste. I am the moderator today for our Weeknight Writers panel. Trigger warnings, writing science fiction with emotional awareness. Today we'll be tackling sensitive topics about science fiction. We are going to hop right in because we only have an hour and there is a lot to go over and discuss. So let's get started. If you see my mouse spazzing out, it's because PowerPoint wants to play games with me. All right. There we go. So I'm going to introduce myself. I am an inner city educator, but I also write SFF. I have a book coming out with Disney called Izzy Hawthorne, Destiny Awaits, which is a middle grade novelization of the upcoming Lightyear Pixar movie that's coming out. And yeah, so I'm going to introduce our panelists, and then they're going to tell a little bit about themselves. Okay, here we go. So we're going to start with Charlie Knight.
Hi, I'm Charlie. I'm an editor for self-published and independent fiction authors. I'm also fan fiction, science fiction, fantasy, science fantasy author. I'm a mom, so you know, if someone small comes streaming by here, you'll know why. Dogs may also join us. I'm really excited to be here. I'm excited to do this with you guys.
All right, thank you, Charlie. Next we have Lex.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lex. I primarily write horror, but I bring a lot of science fiction themes into it. I do a lot of short fiction, currently working on a gothic horror novella. And I also work a lot with the writing community through Write and Wine. We do weekly Twitter chats, as well as just general offering community and support to writers.
Very good. Thank you, Lex. Next, we will be talking to Charlie Bonet,
yes.
Bonet, I'm sorry.
Hi, my name is Charlie. I mostly write SFF. I do have a couple short stories published in various anthologies. But my main writing baby is this world of fairies called the Fairth. So that's what takes up most of my writing time. I also run a online lit magazine specifically for own voices authors called Limoncello.
Awesome, thank you. Next, we have PowerPoint acting up. There we go, Ken.
Hey, I'm Ken. I mostly write military. I self-publish military science fiction mostly, though currently I'm doing a space western. I'm a lifeguard. That's my day job. Pay for the writing. I was also in the U.S. Navy. That's it, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. It's nice to meet you. Next, we have Micah.
As you'll see, I'm from New Zealand, up at a ludicrous time, but this is the topic that, as someone with PTSD, this is a topic that's really close to my heart. Yeah, I get a lot of recommendations of things I can't actually watch. So I write about science fiction and fantasy. I also write technically about people development and agile IT stuff, but I'm not here to talk about this today. Anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a very safe, comfortable space. So we're actually going to talk about that a little bit later when we get to the audience questions, but let's get started, guys. All right, so for those that don't know, here's what a trigger warning is. A trigger warning or a content warning is a statement or a notice that cautions a reader about potentially disturbing or upsetting contents in case someone did not know. And that's the teacher in me if you needed to know. So our first discussion question is, what does emotional awareness mean to you? Would you like to start, Charlie, Knight?
Oh, sure. I think at its simplest, emotional awareness is another term for empathy. It's stepping outside yourself, stopping to consider what someone else might be feeling or thinking, instead of centering what you may be feeling or thinking.
I love that answer. Love that answer. Charlie?
Yeah, so to me, emotional awareness is, I mean, Charlie did a great job.
Yeah.
Not quite sure how to follow up on that.
Copy paste.
But what they said. But yeah, it's knowing who your audience is or your potential audience is and taking into account how you can affect their emotional well-being.
I like that. I like that additional statement. Awesome. Ken?
I'm gonna specify a bit. I think emotional awareness for writing is knowing how your writing is going to affect your audience, but also how like in your universe your characters and the things they go through will emotionally affect them, and how that applies to your audience as well.
I love that answer. Thank you. Lex?
Yeah, I'm actually kind of piggybacking off of what Ken said. I think that it's having empathy, not just for your audience, but also for your characters, and having a deeper understanding of the kinds of topics that you're writing about and how that might translate to people who are not necessarily you or don't necessarily have your lived experiences.
Wow. Y'all going deep today.
Oh, no.
On first question. Micah?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much it's all been said, but it is that really important thing that I've heard a couple of times. It's the easiest thing to say when you're writing about potentially difficult topics is, this thing does not bother me, yeah, but it's that stepping into other people, your readers' shoes. And I really like the point from Lex about not just your readers but your characters. Yeah, if you're going to do this, yeah, a big part of what makes me is trying to be honest and authentic, with what happens with when you go into these subjects with your characters. But yeah, it's extending beyond your own worldview and understanding not everyone is built the same way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Wow. Thank you guys for those answers. So the next question is, at what stage of your writing process do you add trigger warnings? Would it be in drafting, revising, or during the final stage prior to publication? Do you provide trigger warnings to your beta readers, your alpha readers, your agents, or your editors beforehand? Let's start with Lex first.
Sure. So I kind of add and subtract and edit my trigger warning list throughout the process. Normally, when I first start, I'll have a concept in my head and I won't really know where exactly it's going to go. So as new things come up, as I'm giving the piece to different readers, I'll kind of let them know, hey, just a heads up, this topic does get covered. They might pick up on something, alpha readers, beta readers might pick up on something like, oh, hey, this kind of, I had an issue with this, or this made me feel really uncomfortable. You might want to consider warning people about that as well. And that gives me that kind of final trigger warning list for the finished piece.
Yes, I absolutely agree. Sometimes we write things that we don't consider a trigger warning, but your beta reader or whoever you're providing the story to, they might provide a different perspective and actually be like that net for you. So you're not harming other people beyond that stage. So absolutely. Micah?
I want to joke. I'm offended by your very question, just simply because it's like I don't have a plan when I start writing. But it's really, yeah, I usually do it right at the end when it's finished and I know what's actually in my piece. I go, okay, here's the things that happen. Here are the key difficult pieces that happen. But yeah, it's often, I often find from the writing process that a lot of this material actually isn't pre-planned, but it's just you start going in uh, roughly planned, but often you'll go into something and go, actually, I need to go just a little bit deeper and darker than I expected to like I said before, to try and be authentic with how you're covering a situation.
Thank you. Ken?
For the last thing I add, once the final story has been figured out and been over by my beta readers and editor, that's when I like figure out what needs to be warned against.
Yes. Thank you. Charlie Knight?
For my own writing, like Lex, I'm kind of moving and removing and adding them as I go. I keep a separate document along with my outline that I'll play around with as I go. Whatever my betas bring up as well, and that's, I provide them with my list, they provide me with their list. We go back and forth. I think it's super important that we're providing trigger warnings to anyone who's reading our books. As an editor, it's actually something that I require from my clients. It's on the form that they fill out before working with me. And then it's on the contract that they sign to work with me that they will provide them, and that if they chose not to, I have the right to stop working with them. So I think it's absolutely vital we give that respect to everyone who sees our book.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Charlie?
Yeah, my writing goes through weird evolutions. So my trigger warning list does change as I'm going through my writing process. But whatever my current list is, I give to anyone who sees that draft. So I think it's important because again, I or I guess not again, but Charlie Knight is my editor for my books.
Oh,
So that kind of like brought more awareness to me that I was like, oh yeah, this is really important that my editor know, the content that's going to be in my book before they get to it. So prior to that, I had given it to, beta readers and alpha readers, but I hadn't thought of my editor.
To be fair, I think that's pretty standard. I think a lot of people they're like kind of like, okay, well, you're the pro, you're used to it, and it's like, oh, I still have emotions.
yeah, I think it wasn't until I was at the beta reader stage and a beta reader asked me what are the trigger warnings. I was like, oh, I had never ever considered that. And I mean, it makes sense because when you start when you have a background in fan fiction, that's one of the things fan fiction teaches you is that this
Yep.
story has this, and I'm like, I am so ashamed that did not carry over when I started writing original fiction. And I feel like a lot of people should give fan fiction their props because fan fiction really laid the groundwork when it comes to trigger warnings, content warnings, all of that stuff like that since over like 20 years now. So yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Next question. What are common trigger warnings authors should consider using? Let's start with Ken this time.
Well, I mean, there was the two things that we weren't going to talk about in this panel because there's too much discussion on essay and gratuitous violence. I think those are the big general topics that we need to like be very careful about what we put in, what we warn about people with.
Yes, absolutely. Let's see. Charlie Bonnet.
So yeah, aside from those two, or kind of extrapolating on the second one, the gratuitous violence, I think there are specific things that I at least like to mention. Like there's a general like gore label, you know, like there's violence, there's blood shed happening. I I write dark fantasy, dark sci-fi fantasy, by the way. So I tend to have a lot of triggers in my books. But I try to include a list that has like more specific things than just gratuitous violence. So if I have like specifically murder, I will say there is murder. If I have um what's a, my mind's blanking now. Like
Like
if
gun
there's
violence,
what?
gun violence.
Yeah, I would if I used guns, I would put that in there, like there is specifically gun violence. So yeah, just something to give your reader more of an idea of what they're walking into and just instead of just like there's violence, you know.
Mhm. Thank you. Lex?
Yeah, definitely what has already been said. But I would also say if you are new to using trigger warnings, if you're not quite sure what to do with them, take a look at the content warnings that you get on movies and TV shows. Even a lot of people ask me, they're like, well, you write horror, you read horror, you watch horror, you must be so used to, and your audience must be so used to gore, violence, all this stuff. And yes, to an extent, that's true. But some of it is more triggering than others, or some of it that does not trigger me is going to trigger somebody else. So if you look at a particularly violent movie and see the kinds of content warnings that they're putting up, gore, gratuitous violence, all of those sorts of things, if your work has that in it, maybe consider treating it like a movie content warning.
I like that advice. I like that tip. That's like a little shortcut. Yeah, absolutely. I like that a lot. Um, Charlie May?
Everything else that's been said, I agree with. I think it's also in terms of specifics, like Charlie, like other Charlie said. I think it's important that we consider the current world that our readers are living in. So when I get specific, I would now include something like police brutality, because that's not just violence, it's a very specific form of violence that is a very specific trigger. Same thing with anything pandemic related now. I always recommend that if there is anything mass death related, pandemic related, contagion related, that there's a very specific content warning for that. We're all being traumatized actively every day. So I think that when we're building content warnings, we look at the times, at what's going on right now, and we adjust for that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, I absolutely agree. You have to show your audience that you're with the times,
Yeah, absolutely.
you do, because it shows that you are aware, and that you're not trying to be blissfully ignorant, or
Right.
purposely pretend like this never existed.
Mm-hmm.
Micah?
Yeah, I've just finished a fantasy novel and I thought at the end of it, I'm not going to have any trigger warnings from this. And then I was like, oh yeah, there's depictions of racism there, which I think would be a big one to kind of
Mm-hmm.
single out. In this particular book, I was like, oh, it won't really be like that because the racism is about orcs, and I'm like, yeah, but racism is racism. It's very uncomfortable. So that would be a good move on. And I think the other one that came out for the Melody Harper series is suicide as well. Is an item that deserves its own trigger warning, because it's such a very emotive topic in itself.
That's a very good point, specifically about like SFF species, especially since a lot of SFF species are built off of very racist, stereotypical, cultural stereotypes. And so, for instance, like orcs are very, dark skinned and intimidating. And a lot of the times they are a stand in for, um, cultures that people back in the day thought that were very vicious and savage, and that darkness of skin, attributed to like a savageness. So yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Did everyone get a chance to answer that question?
You're doing good.
Sure. All right. So, do you prefer putting trigger warnings in simplistic, straightforward lists or in a detailed author note? Also, do you think that a list of trigger warnings is sufficient in warning your audience about complex themes in your book? Let's start with Mika.
Gosh, I end up with this one. Hey, not a look. Before my books, there's quite a long page where I go into, for most people, trigger warnings aren't a thing, and then feed into it. So I tend to be like the later, kind of going into a little bit of detail, saying, if trigger warnings are something that you need to know, here's what you need to know about what will happen in the book. And that's the approach that I've used and that I feel comfortable with. But I've had feedback from a couple of people that said, "Oh, it's just a little bit too long," and I kind of zone out afterwards. And I'm like, "Yeah, but for the people that need to, it's there." I'm. This is a topic I don't think I'm doing particularly brilliantly sometimes. I'm covering, but what's the best way to cover it? Um, Absolutely, it's been mentioned. There's so many. I've noticed, particularly with watching things with Netflix, there'll be like a little thing telling and to do with ratings, just saying, oh, such and such, this will contain, depictions of violence. My big confusion is ones about Star Trek Next Generation, where it warns me, this episode will contain sex scenes, and I'm like, I don't think I've seen this episode like this. It's because it's very tame, because it's very, very tame. But even that that concerns me, because I've out of interest, I was looking at a couple of episodes, and particularly there's one where a character is kind of sexually assaulted, and it just has sex scenes, yeah, and it's like, yeah, but it's not just sex scenes, is it? It's not like if you have an episode with Riker, there's always going to be a sex scene, because that's what Riker does. But the difference between a character going through something very traumatic in regard to an assault, yeah, that needs more than just sex scene, and that's where I feel just a simple can kind of fall down a little bit.
Right. Um, that's a very good point. I also would like to mention that it's almost time for the second half of the for the audience questions, but I would like to make a note that we will not be answering questions about SA or gratuitous violence, because it's to protect everyone that's in the panel, that's in the audience, but also they are just two very complex topics that we only have so much time to actually, talk about it. So I just wanted to make that be known. All right. Lex.
So personally, I like lists, and that's mainly because if I'm looking at trigger warnings, I haven't committed to reading the book yet. I'm kind of checking to see if that book is going to be safe for me to read. And I know what my triggers are, so I'm going to be able to spot that language much easier in a list than in a detailed author's note. However, I do understand that if you are trying to communicate to your audience that, hey, this is going to come up, this is why I used it, here's how to be safe, here's a list of resources, that's also very valuable. So I think that you can kind of make both work and combine them. But I definitely think that listing things out might be a little bit safer for your audience. Just my personal opinion.
That's a very good point. Very good point. Charlie Bonet.
Yeah, so my experience is very similar to Lex's in that it's a lot easier for me to spot my triggers if they're in a list than in a note. But the way I hope to tackle trigger warnings when my book is published is that I want to do a combination. I want to have a list of just, these are the straight up points that we're going to hit. But then I also want to have just a small, short, like maybe a paragraph note to talk about the more complex themes that are going to run through the book instead of just leaving that to list form.
Very good point. Very good point. Ken?
I haven't figured that one out fully, actually. I mean, there's benefits to both, like, but it's like it's the themes I'm trying to convey in the book. Like, it's like, do I want to like talk about this in detail? Because some things do need to be discussed in detail. Or it's like, do I just put a list? Sorry.
No, you're good. You're good.
um and sometimes like I'm like, I want it to hit the reader because like it's supposed to be shocking and horrible, and a lot of themes get watered down too much in mainstream think or deliberately watered down by mainstream like media to like not have the impact that would affect people. And so it's always an ongoing debate with me, like where do I put them, like, and how much do I actually say about each trigger warning.
Absolutely. You made an amazing point. Charlie Knight?
I agree that the combination is tends to be really effective. I think if something is very straightforward, list it in a very straightforward way. I'm a fanfic writer, so I mean, I'm all about those lists of trigger warnings. There are some things that get more complex. It's probably weird that I have a favorite trigger warnings that I've ever seen, but I'm an editor, so I have weird favorites about books. 1500 Miles from the Sun, the author did this really beautiful, poignant note at the beginning for the trigger warnings. And I think it was especially relevant because they were so closely tied to the plot, and none of them was very simple. And it ended up being this really beautiful way to warn the reader and also introduce them to the story. And I've forever been impressed by that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Let's see. Thank you, everyone, for answering that question. Someone mentioned this in the chat, and luckily, it's one of the questions that are here. And there's much debate about where to put trigger warnings in a book. What is your preference? Let's start with Charlie Bonet.
So I know there's some stuff going around, especially on Twitter and TikTok right now, about Amazon trying to shut down books that have trigger warnings or content warnings in specific parts of the book. And I'm not entirely knowledgeable on that, so I'm not going to try and say that I am. But what I feel is a really great way to do it is to not only have it in the book, but have it somewhere that people can reference. So, like, I have an author website. I am going to make sure that my trigger warnings are found on my author website so that, if something happens where I cannot put it physically in the book, I will have a note saying, hey, go to this website. This is where my trigger warning list is. Keep yourself safe. So,
Thank you. I had no idea about the Amazon thing. That's very terrifying. And also the censorship in that is very okay.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for letting me know that. I'm gonna have to look that up. Micah?
Yeah, so I think where, um, in the Amazon listing for Melody Harper's Moon, I bring out that like a quick one sentence item that kind of summarizes the trigger warnings, about deals with strong language, deals with sexual assault and suicide themes about sexual assault and suicide. So I've got something in there so that even before somebody clicks on buy, that they know what they're getting into. And then of course pretty much right at the front, pretty much after the title and dedication, yeah, that's where I give an overview, like I've discussed, really a detailed overview, an engagement with the reader, because I tend to put notes at the front and at the back because I see particularly with the Melody Harper series, the importance of kind of engaging with the reader up front and at the end, because the books do deal with some very difficult topics, very personal topics to me, and just really kind of want to check in before and afterwards.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Lex?
So I really like Charlie's point of putting them on your website somewhere where they are really easily accessible. As far as within a book, I kind of prefer to have all of that stuff up front. Again, I kind of compare it to a movie. You see the rating on the poster, right? You get all that, and usually there's that little box that lists out why it got that rating. And I feel like the same thing should be had for a book. It's still a piece of media that you're consuming. It's a piece of fiction that you should know what you're getting into beforehand. And I don't think that it's something that we should be hiding in the back of the book or anything like that.
Absolutely. And also, to piggyback off of that, I've noticed that a lot more authors are putting content warnings and trigger warnings in their review of their own book on things like Goodreads and Amazon. And I believe there's one more. There's like a newer one that's like Black owned. I can't remember off the
Is
top
that
of.
Storygraph?
Yes, Storygraph. And I believe Storygraph, it's very like their platform is very big when it comes to content warnings and trigger warnings. Like it's very detailed, a lot more detailed than Goodreads. And then also it being, Black owned, that's another plus. Ken?
So I've actually been going back and been looking at what trigger warnings to add to my first two published books. Because I'd always do them for my short stories, but my first two novels didn't have them. So that's part of why I got on this panel. But I would have done it like right at the front, like first page of book. But that thing about the Amazon, like censoring it, I'm gonna reconsider. Charlie's point about, I think, author bio page is great, because people are gonna be looking at that. Like people will be looking at all your books like from there, so they'll see it, like as an overarching thing. Especially because all my books hit similar themes, so I can provide general warnings right from there.
Absolutely. Charlie Knight?
I think very simply, if your trigger warnings are not clearly marked and visible at the front of the book, whether that be because you're using a link or a QR code, or even if you have a page number to the back of the book to avoid spoilers or for whatever reason, if they're not at the front of the book, there needs to be a note at the front of the book about where to find them. Whether or not you list them right there in the front of the book, they need to be immediately accessible when the person opens the book. Like Lex said, that's when we're deciding if that book is safe for us, and having to search for it that doesn't feel like an option to me.
Yeah. It almost feels very, what's the word I'm looking for?
Cop out.
Sneaky. Yeah, like it almost feels sneaky sometimes because people want them to buy some people want them to buy the book. I've seen books where the trigger warnings are actually like at the back of the book after like the not the dedication, but the what's
About the author.
Yes. And I'm like, yeah, that probably, might have should have been at the front, depending on what they're writing,
Right.
what the content, what the actual trigger is.
Or at least a note at the front that
Yeah.
says you can find them on page.
Yeah,
blah,
right.
blah.
Perfect.
That's fine. Yeah.
Exactly. Has everyone had an opportunity to answer that question? Okay. So now we are entering the questions from the audience segment. As I said before, to keep this a safe and comfortable space for everyone, we will not be taking questions about SA or gratuitous violence because as we said before, they are just very complex topics and we only have an hour panel. So I am going to exit out of this. Hopefully it'll let me. And sorry guys, close that out. And let's go to the questions because we actually have quite a few. Yay. Oh, let's see what we have. What are some things you wish were mentioned in trigger warnings and content warnings, which I believe we answered a question or something similar to that, I believe.
I think we did what are common. And this is like
common ones. Let's see. Christina says, I've never seen a book with trigger warnings. Is it becoming more of a standard practice in publishing? Would anyone like to answer that question?
Can I? Do you mind if I take it?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I've been editing fiction for 13 years. And the short answer is that, yeah, they're fairly new, actually, especially if you were considering genre. Most of the big names, especially if we're talking about sci-fi, and especially if we're talking about fantasy, most of the big names were always cis white men. They didn't consider trigger warnings necessary. Things didn't bother them. They didn't include it. That's just where publishing was. As it opens, as write books, find their voices, we're seeing more trigger warnings. We're seeing authors who are more aware of the world around them and more aware of their readers and their audience. So yeah, they're newer and they're becoming more common.
Would anyone else like to add to that? Or we can just agree that Charlie aced it.
I think we can agree that.
I'd like to add a little rider to that. If the publishers think that there's more money in it, they'll do it. Like that's how this works. If enough people say we want trigger warnings, they'll be like, okay, we won't lose an audience for having trigger warnings, and they'll make that industry practice.
That's a very, very, very good point. Though I sometimes wonder if because self-published books seem to be more comfortable and it's more of a commonplace in self-published books to add trigger warnings and content warnings, especially in the product description on, say, like Amazon. I wonder if publishing's willingness to add trigger warnings is because of that, it works so well in self-publishing. That's obviously a question we wouldn't know because we're not publishing, and we know that publishing might not even know, to be 100% honest. But that is something to consider. Let's see. Our next question is, how do you give detailed warnings, trigger warnings, without spoiling main plot points? Would anyone like to give that question a go? Yeah, absolutely, can.
Because I'm literally going through this process with my first two books right now. I think the biggest thing is to be, I guess, a bit abstract with it. Like, talk about, like, you can tell them exactly like what theme that's damaging is in there, but you don't need to say where it is or like who's involved. Like just detailed summary on what theme is in there. And I mean, they'll know it when they see it. Like,
That's a very good point. That's a very good point. Would anyone else have, does anyone else
Yeah,
have something they'd like to?
I mean, I just pick up on this a little bit, and I'm in this kind of changing my glamorous hat for as an author for one as a reader. As someone who struggles with PTSD, I will often actually read a wiki by the wiki summary of anything that I'm going to watch or read, so I can basically make that decision myself. Yeah, so I'll often know what a film or a book will contain, so I know if I'm comfortable going into it. I can't actually believe, given I used to watch the new Star Battlestar Galactica, and sometimes I'd read what was happening in an episode, and I'm like, nah, I'm good. I'll just skip this one. Yeah, and that's what you have to do as somebody who's aware of the certain things that you can experience that will just make you very uncomfortable.
A very weird place that I like to go to find the trigger warnings of a book, if it's not explicitly stated in the book or by the author, is I actually like to go to 1-star and 2-star reviews on Goodreads and Amazon and whatever, review website, because they will let you know exactly what's in that book. And a lot of them will provide trigger warnings and content warnings in advance, and some of them, even though depending on if you want to spoil yourself or not, they'll let you know this is what happened in this context. And it's nice to know so that when you actually come upon it, you're prepared. Because I have PTSD myself, and I have a few triggers myself, I've gotten used to spoiling myself to protect myself. I don't mind reading a spoiler if I know that I can prepare myself so that when I get to that point, it's not going to send me on a downward spiral. So, some readers, they don't mind being spoiled. But also, other readers, they don't like the spoilers. So it's almost like a darned if you do, darned if you don't. It's really a halfway point, I feel. But if you would like to see how you can do trigger warnings without spoilers, I would highly recommend looking at like 1 and 2 stars reviews, to try that out.
I think too, this is where those links that we mentioned, like Charlie said at the beginning of your book, if you have a link to your author website where you are going to include your trigger warnings, your readers have a choice right then and there whether or not they're gonna go spoil it for themselves. You can make this very, very easy for your readers and for yourself to avoid that spoiler by not putting it in the book and telling them where to find it.
Very true. It's better to be honest and upfront with your reader, whether it's your intended audience, or it's readership that you're trying to build upon. Like, honesty is key. It's easier to just show readers that you want them to have an enjoyable reading experience, instead of it being, a minefield where they don't know, like, if I turn the next page, will it be a mine I'm going to be stepping on? Then that's not enjoyable at all. I'm sorry, I have a dog that's squeaking a squeaky toy. Give me the sorry. I apologize. Next, the next question we have is, as a newcomer in writing, what trigger warning do I have to work on publishing my publishing book? Could you expand on that a little bit? the, I can't pronounce this name. What is it? Tangena? Could you expand on that question? While we are waiting for Tangena to expand on that question.
Shall we move to another one?
Yeah, we're gonna move to another one while
Yes.
they're expanding. Let's see what we have. Is there an argument to be made that plots and character backstories shouldn't rely on potentially upsetting surprises partway through a book? Would anyone like to answer that? Sure, Kim.
We all go through things in our life that are potentially upsetting, and I mean that we won't want to share with other people. And your fictional characters, if they're people, if they're human, like, will be going through those things like in their backstory or what occurs in the actual story. And that's part of just writing human characters, I think, is that there's going to be something they have to deal with that that's going to be deeply personal and damaging to them, and they have to work through. Hell, if they're a military character, that's what boot camp is basically going through, making you go through like 8 weeks of very uncomfortable experiences to see how you deal with that.
I'd like to jump in on this one as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I feel like the crux of this question might also be, are we using these twists to shock the audience, or are they being used genuinely as part of the story? And I think that that takes a lot of self-awareness as the writer to kind of question yourself and say, okay, am I trying to comment on something or give this character a challenge? Or am I doing this for pure shock value to get a reaction out of the audience? And if you're doing it for shock value, you're doing it for the wrong reason. And it's going to be to the detriment of your story, unfortunately. So just really be aware of how you're writing these very difficult topics and what you're using them for.
Absolutely, I agree. It needs to be meaningful. It needs to be meaningful. And if you are trying to go on the traditional publishing route, really, Judge, if you're trying to go on a traditional publishing route, agents can pick up on that. They can pick up and they will call you out on it in a heartbeat. So definitely consider when you are doing those plot twists that it's not just a shocker just to be a shocker, and that it actually has meaning, that actually is earned. All your plot twists have to be earned. There has to be seeds put in place throughout the story leading up to that point, so that readers have that forewarning, like little indicators that you could be going in that direction. So it's very important for that.
Foreshadowing instead.
Thank you. That's the word I'm looking for. I don't know why I said seeds and indicators.
No, it's right. No. It's
right. I'm
but
the kindergarten teacher in me. Yes.
And believe me, as you're saying this, I'm thinking about every book where in the last like chapter it's like, oh, that's who the murderer is. I remember reading a book once where someone says at some point, oh, my friends just dropped me off, yeah? And it's like, oh, that person's going to turn out to be more important than you'd think. And that's turned out to be the murderer. It's like, just, you feel so cheated.
There's a really good question. Should I mention that I have PTSD, and there are themes related to this? I'm not a panelist, but can I answer this question?
Yeah.
I have PTSD, and thank you. Thank you. Sorry. I have PTSD, and yes, absolutely. My book has PTSD, and it is extremely important because what a lot of people do not realize is people don't understand the complexity of PTSD depending on the trauma. A lot of people are so used to media depicting PTSD as something that soldiers get because it's shell shock and they saw a gunshot and, you know, XYZ. And it was just this very violent and, you know, crazy thing that happened. But also, some PTSD is caused by things that are a lot quieter. And I feel like for instance, a perfect example, I had PTSD through childhood trauma, and my father has PTSD because he was in the army. So he has shell shock. I don't, but we still have PTSD, and there is a range and a spectrum. And I feel like if you are listing trigger warnings and themes that are related to it, people should see that, you know, this led to this, and this is why it's in the umbrella of this care. You have another squeaky toy? So I'm so sorry. And it led, and this is why it's caused, you know, PTSD in this character. Would anyone like to build on that?
Yeah, I would actually just like to add, because I know that the question kind of asks, should I mention that I have it? And I just feel like every writer should know that that disclosure is entirely up to you. If you're writing about something that comes from your own lived experience, most of us are, if it would help you to tell your audience, hey, I'm writing about this because I went through it and this is an own voices piece, that is up to you. But if you are not comfortable talking about that publicly just yet, you don't have to mention it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Would anyone else like to build on that, or? Cool. Let's move on to.
I think we skipped a question from Diana about what trigger warnings should be common that aren't.
Oh,
I think
I'm
that
sorry,
popped up
Diana.
before this one.
Absolutely. Would anyone like to answer that?
Animal death. Please tell me if the dog dies.
Hard agree.
Oh.
I don't want to read it. I need you to tell me in advance.
Yeah. Animal deaths, animal cruelty, most definitely.
Oh.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I gave a dog a reprieve over this. I introduced the dog in book one who was going to be euthanized in book 3. I even wrote the scene, and then I just couldn't do it. But what's really amazing, I found a way not just to save them, but to advance the plot forward like it was always planned.
Perfect.
So that was fantastic.
Dogs are extinct in my setting. Sorry. That's why humans are so unhappy.
Oh,
That's a good reason, though. I'd be pretty
Checks out, yeah.
Another one I would mention is probably anything related to children, child abuse, child death, that kind of thing. A lot of people don't, or just harm, child harm. We need to know if a child is going to be harmed in the story, at least for me. So that's another thing that definitely should be considered. Tangina says back to her previous question. The question was, as a newcomer in writing, what trigger warning?
Can I add one more detail in the last one?
Sure.
I think this is a bit, I guess, open, but power dynamics, like I don't know, if someone is I'm sorry, that's a bit of a topic, and I can't get past that, but just power dynamics, if someone is like dominating someone else, I mean, that's what a lot of abuse is. It's mentally overwhelming someone, and I know that can bother a lot of people who've been through that. like
Yeah, bullying, basically. Yeah.
Absolutely. Verbal abuse, that's another one to piggyback off of that. That's a big one, is verbal abuse.
Can I kind of flip that question around and say that I think there are some trigger warnings that we see sometimes commonly that shouldn't be there, like anything involving identity. Every time I see a trigger warning for like gay sex or queer relationships, I want to throw the book into a fire.
Yeah.
You don't need to warn me about identities. And I think that's very common and very much should not be.
Yep. I think when we were talking about 1-star reviews, sometimes you'll go in there and you will see all kinds of trash. And indeed, I got feedback of, gosh, there was a few too many LGBTQ characters in this book, and I'm like, that's not a.
That doesn't make sense.
You didn't need to be warned about that. No, you really don't, because sorry, I had people in this book, and those people didn't align with you, and you're choosing to get offended by that. Maybe that's because you're an asshole. Sorry if I'm swearing.
You're good.
But yeah, but it's like no.
We have time for one more question. Tangina, the question that she had asked was, as a newcomer in writing, what trigger warning do I have to work on my publishing book? And they extended to like editing, proofreading, or how to manage the sites. What will be the trigger warning for a new one? What will be the trigger warning for traditionally publishing for a new author on how to approach an agent? So are you, okay, I think I understand what you're saying. So you're basically asking, if you are going on a traditionally published route, if you are trying to query an agent, should you list the trigger warnings, is what I'm getting at. Would anyone like to answer that question?
I'll hop in.
Go ahead.
I think it's respectful to do so if you have some pretty general trigger warnings that you can just say like, hey, just an FYI, but also check the agent's guidelines, because they might have specific things that they want to be warned about or that they don't mind seeing. You're going to be tailoring every single query you write to the specific agent that you're querying. So just check all of their guidelines and see what they might want you to do. If they don't mention trigger warnings and you have some that are pretty heavy, you might just want to put like a little note in your query of just FYI.
Thank you. Very good point. Very good point. Okay, we are 1 minute away from being finished. I would like to thank everyone. Thank you for all the panelists that joined us today. Thank you for all of the audience that joined us today.
This video is a recording of a panel from Storycrafting Sessions Science Fiction, a free virtual conference hosted by the Weeknight Writers Group in partnership with Renaissance Press. To learn more about the Weeknight Writers Group, go to businessforauthors.com/weeknight-writers. And to learn more about Renaissance Press, you can go to pressesrenaissancepress.ca.